So, big question is, how do you create a conversation guide, right? Where do you start? What questions do you ask? Well, it pretty much all goes back to your research plan. Your research plan is and will always be your source of truth. Conversation guides are an extension of your research goals and research questions. It's a way of reframing internal business questions to external consumer facing or personal questions. And these personal questions are meant for your research participants, not for internal customers, not for internal stakeholders, but for people who do not work at your company, people who don't necessarily have any idea about your company or the context or the goals that you're trying to have, that you're trying to accomplish. So let's take a look at, some ways to possibly reframe business questions to research questions to questions that you would ask on a conversation guide for a, for a potential participant, excuse me. So, here again, your research plan is your source of truth. And if you think about this from a funnel perspective, right? Your internal questions are at the top of the funnel, right? That's where things start. And as you digest those internal business questions into research questions, the bottom of the funnel really is questions for your participants, right? And you want to think about a way that you can reframe those business questions to be context specific or relatable for your participants, because questions are context specific. Business questions are business specific. Research questions are research specific, and interview questions for participants are interview questions specific. So, asking a participant a business question would probably confuse them because they aren't a part of the business. They don't work with you or the business team. So they have zero context about what's going on. If you go back to the skit again that Yao and I did, one of the objectives for the stakeholder was to identify targeted users, as well as what targeted users of the platform would expect. So let's say you ask a participant that same question. Like, imagine asking a participant, what would targeted users of the platform expect? That probably wouldn't resonate with them because, again, they don't work within the company. So, you probably get a response that's not useful or confuses them, right? So context matters. So, here we have a sample business question that we've reframed into a research question, right? So the business objective was to identify what targeted users of the platform would expect. From a business lens or business context, that makes sense. But we can reframe that to be more focused on a research lens, right? To make it research specific. So reframing that would look like, what would ideal users of Reach expect from the platform, right? And that's really a way of placing yourself in the shoes of a researcher, as you all are. So how can we reframe that same research question into an interview question that you would ask somebody that doesn't have any context about the place of business that you work in, right? So way to do that, again, is to place yourself in the shoes of that person or in the shoes of the participant, right? And it's okay to think out loud and to ask yourself, how can you reframe these questions? That's sort of an exercise that I use, right? Going through the different ways to make sure that it sounds more personal, to make sure that it sounds more external facing, right? How can you make this sound more friendly for someone that you don't work with? It takes a little bit of time, but the most important thing for sure is to make sure that you're asking a question that doesn't confuse participants. So, once you've got a good personal question, write it down, right? Write it down, say it out loud as many times as possible to see if it makes sense to you. and then try to edit that question to reframe it even more, whether if you're fine tuning it or reframing it to, different ways. But the most important thing is that you have a starting point. So once you have that starting point, you know that you're in a good position, and you can make that question even better, right? To make it sound more fluid, to make it sound more personal, to make it sound like anyone will be able to answer it and would not be confused. So, imagine that you've gone through the exercise and you're able to come to a good place, right? One way to reframe this research question of what would ideal users of Reach expect from the platform as an interview question is, as a speaker. So imagine you're speaking to an ideal user who's a speaker, and you're able to, transform that into something that you think is in a really, really, really good place. A good question to ask somebody that you're moderating an interview with is, as a speaker, how would you expect an online marketplace for speakers and organizers to help you achieve your goals? And I think that resonates with ideal users who are speakers, who are, looking for marketplaces, right? And you can see how we sort of thought through this process of reframing, right? It's a mental exercise that comes with practice, and also a mental exercise that you don't have to do alone, right? So again, the skit that Yao and I had, making sure that the stakeholders had an opportunity to leave feedback on the research plan was really important, because research does not happen in silos. It's a collaborative exercise between your stakeholders and whoever else you may be working with. So, having that group input can also help to make sure that you're aligned and asking questions that resonates with multiple audiences, especially for, your ideal users or for people that you're going to be moderating interviews with. So now, it's your turn, right? Let's try to build a conversation guide together. And again, we're going to be building on the same exercise that Yao and I performed during the skit. So the Research Bookmark team actually has a conversation guide template for you all to download. And hopefully you'll be able to access that with ease, right? So the template, you'll be giving access to that via Zoom. And once you have access to the document, you can simply make a copy of it, and then you can get started, right? So again, your research plan is the source of truth. You have your research questions that are informed from the stakeholder interview, and you have your research goals. So we're going to give everybody about 15 minutes to work on completing your conversation guide. And this may be the first time for some of you doing this, and that's completely okay. Try your best and remember to think about how you would reframe your research questions to questions that people who don't work with you will be able to answer, questions that your friends or potentially your family will be able to answer, right? Try your best, and also remember to place yourself in the shoes of the participant, right? Making sure that the questions come across in the right way. I think that's a great way to sort of help yourself reframe these questions, and to also making sure that, you're articulating to be able to find a good place to start. Once you find that good place, you can elaborate, you can expand, you can iterate, but at least you have a good place to start. And with that, let's make sure that the research conversation guide template is accessible. I will click on that. Okay, so it looks like it does work. We are good to go.